Jiang Xueqin was born in 1976 in the southern Chinese province of Guangdong, into a family that moved between worlds long before he ever spoke his first words. His father was a high school teacher, his mother a seamstress. When Jiang was 6 years old, his early life was swept up in one of the largest migrations of the late 20th century. His family left China at the end of its Cultural Revolution and resettled in Toronto, Canada. The life of a young immigrant was not cushioned by privilege. He wore hand-me-down clothes. He spoke an accent that marked him as foreign. He lived in multicultural neighborhoods where survival depended not on birthright but on adaptation. In Canada, Jiang's upbringing was shaped by dual cultural realities. At home, he absorbed stories of China's ancient dynasties, revolutionary fervor, and philosophical traditions. Outside, he encountered Western individualism, free speech, and the promise of personal reinvention. These two currents, East and West, would become lifeblood in the intellectual development that followed. Academically, he was sharp and determined. Like many immigrants' children, he felt pressure to excel, to justify his family's sacrifice. After high school, he applied to elite universities across the United States. In an era when Yale, Harvard, MIT, and Princeton were seen not just as seats of learning, but as gateways to global influence. While he faced rejection from several of these institutions, he ultimately won a scholarship to Yale College, where he studied English literature and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in 1999. Yale was not a place that taught him what to think, but it taught him how to think, how to interrogate narratives, how to dissect rhetoric, how to map history and meaning. It was a period of intellectual growth, mixed with periods of existential confusion, the kind that leaves deep marks on a young mind once touched by dual cultural identity. After university, his path diverged from the predictable career tracks of corporate ambition or academia. Instead, he entered the world of education reform, first in China during the early 2000s. In those years, China was rapidly transforming. Its middle classes were expanding, its universities were growing, and debates about educational quality, creativity, and conformity were intensifying. Jiang became actively involved in these discussions, not as a bureaucrat, but as a critic, someone who saw shortcomings, who questioned why rote memorization dominated classrooms, why creativity was discouraged, why students learned what to think instead of how to think. His perspective was shaped by the tension between Eastern collectivism and Western individualism. In traditional Chinese education, he observed, students were shaped to fit a system, disciplined, aligned, harmonious. In Western education, he saw students encouraged to question, to disrupt, to innovate. Both models had strengths, but both had vulnerabilities. Jiang's own philosophy became a blend. Respect for tradition combined with a fierce desire for critical thinking, civic awareness, and intellectual independence. By the 2000s, his voice was already distinctive. He wrote articles and gave interviews that criticized rigid schooling, arguing that education should nurture the soul as much as the mind. He later published books on education reform and the philosophy of human development, works that circulated beyond academics, reaching teachers, parents, and young professionals. But the event that would transform his life into a global narrative was neither a policy paper nor a classroom lecture. It was a YouTube channel, born not out of ambition for fame, but out of urgency to speak truth as he saw it. In the early 2020s, as digital platforms became the dominant arenas of public discourse, Jiang launched a channel called Predictive History. On this channel, he branded himself casually as Professor Jiang, not because he was a traditional university professor, but because he taught ideas, narratives, patterns, and interpretations. His approach was analytical but provocative. He examined world events through historical cycles, geopolitical strategy, social psychology, and cultural dynamics. His videos were not simple summaries of current events. They were deep narratives that connected past and present, ideology and consequence, power and psychology. Over time, his audience grew exponentially. People were not just watching history, they were using it to understand the moment they lived in. Within a few years, his subscriber count climbed into the millions. What made his voice distinct, and to many electrifying, was his willingness to challenge both Western and Eastern orthodoxies without bowing to convenience. He criticized authoritarian practices in any system that suppressed critical thought. Yet he was equally critical of Western media narratives that oversimplified complex geopolitical realities into ideological binaries. This put him in an unusual position. He was embraced by a broad audience that ranged from young critical thinkers in the West to cosmopolitan students in Asia and the Middle East. His style was not dry academic lecture. It was conversational, dramatic, and emotionally intelligent. He had the ability to make viewers feel both informed and unsettled, a combination that kept millions returning to his channel for every release. He dissected the rise and fall of empires, the hidden motives in diplomacy, the psychological rhythms of public opinion, and the cyclical patterns of history. He did not just report what happened. He tried to predict what might happen based on deep structural analysis, which gave his series its name. Despite being a public intellectual, he did not frame himself as a dogmatic believer in any religion. He identified personally as a thinker who respected philosophical depth wherever it appeared, whether in Taoist reflections on harmony, Buddhist notions of impermanence, Christian ethical narratives, or secular humanist commitments to reason and dignity. That eclecticism became part of his appeal. He was neither strictly secular nor dogmatically religious. Instead, he invoked religious and philosophical traditions as lenses to examine human motives, cognitive biases, cultural norms, and moral frameworks. Yet his rise was not without controversy. Critics labeled him a conspiracy theorist, but his supporters argued that what he offered was a framework to understand the unseen forces shaping world events, media narratives, power structures, economic interests, and psychological manipulation. Wherever truth was convenient and history was flattening complexity into slogans, he pushed back. Wherever power used stories to pacify rather than enlighten, he questioned the narratives on behalf of his audience. By 2025, his online presence had become enormous. His videos would routinely be shared across multiple platforms, spawning discussions, debates, and reinterpretations. He became what some called a digital public philosopher, a bridge between academic depth and online accessibility. During the global geopolitical convulsions that followed the early 2020s, his voice became particularly significant. As tensions flared between superpowers, as wars unfolded, as narratives about freedom and tyranny clashed in global media, millions turned to his analysis not for comfort, but for cognitive clarity. He challenged simplistic binaries and invited viewers to consider the deep historical patterns that shaped today's crises. He asked his audience to look at the motivations behind conflicts, the psychology of nations, and the construction of narratives. One of his most discussed ideas was his critique of how modern societies educate citizens, not to think critically, but to consume narratives. He argued that true education must teach people how to question narratives, not merely accept them, whether those narratives came from Silicon Valley, Washington, authoritarian regimes, or traditional academic institutions. For Jiang, the moment humanity surrendered critical thinking to convenience, it surrendered its agency. Perhaps the single most compelling component of his influence was that he did not claim certainty. He offered probability, pattern recognition, historical resonance, psychological insight, and structural analysis. He taught his audience to think through problems, not to memorize slogans. In an age of information overload, he offered interpretation. His channel became not just a source of commentary, it became a community of thinkers, skeptics, researchers, and people hungry for intellectual depth. Millions of subscribers often engaged in discussions, debates that were more rigorous than typical online comment sections. For many, his channel served as an alternative educational institution, one that rivaled university curricula in breadth and depth. Despite his massive influence, he remained personally humble. He did not chase celebrity. He did not pivot toward commercial gimmicks. He published newsletters, engaged with followers thoughtfully, and continued to produce long-form content that resisted quick summarization. His approach was timeless, not trending. He wanted not to be liked, but to make people think. In his offline life, he continued to be involved in educational theory and practice. He wrote books that went beyond commentary, books that explored how societies construct knowledge, how memory shapes identity, and how history can be a predictive tool when understood deeply. His perspectives drew from a wide range of traditions: Confucian respect for ethical cultivation, Western philosophical skepticism, Buddhist contemplation on impermanence, and secular commitments to rational inquiry. He did not endorse any single religious doctrine, but he showed respect for the moral and ethical depth found in many traditions, particularly where they encouraged reflection, empathy, and human dignity. His followers often spoke of his ideas as mind-bending because he never offered easy answers. Instead, he revealed the underlying connections between seemingly unrelated events: economic policy and cultural shifts, media narratives and geopolitical strategy, individual psychology and collective action. He pushed his viewers to see not just the surface of events, but the depth. And because his channel spanned the world, his influence was not limited by borders. People from Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas engaged with his analysis. He brought global issues into conversation with historical depth and human psychology, something that traditional media rarely attempted. What made Jiang truly unique as a figure was not just the size of his audience, but the quality of engagement he sparked. Viewers did not passively consume. They questioned, they debated, they wrote essays, they formed study groups. Some even embarked on academic research inspired by his ideas. In an era when online voices often feel disposable, his felt foundational, like an intellectual undercurrent beneath the surface frenzy of headlines and opinion loops. He taught that history is not a static museum of dead facts. It is a dynamic river of patterns, one that demands active interpretation. Today, in the digital age's turbulent swirl of information, controversy, and rapid change, Jiang Xueqin stands as one of the most intriguing and influential modern educators. A man whose life journey from immigrant classrooms to global stage is itself a testament to the power of inquiry. In a world where many voices repeat what people want to hear, he asked people to grapple with what they need to understand. His story is not simply about fame or influence. It is about rekindling the spirit of inquiry in a world that is overwhelmed with answers. It is about confronting complexity rather than avoiding it. It is about recognizing that the most dangerous ignorance is not the absence of knowledge. It is the illusion of understanding. And in that mission, to wake minds, challenge assumptions, and illuminate patterns, Jiang Xueqin became not just a digital educator, but a signal in the noise of history.